But today we're going to be talking about the movie Brave. This is the last of our Pixar sermon series. And the movie Brave includes a conflict that I kind of alluded to already with the kids. And it involves a conflict, an age-old conflict between a mother and daughter. A very simple thing at its heart, and yet has a lot of facets to it. I mean, what it comes down to is Merida, the girl we see in the frame here, big red hair and the bow, is a princess in the Scottish Highlands, and she loves to. She was given a gift by her dad when she was really little, this bow and arrow, and she loves to shoot and ride and rock climb and get dirty and scrape her knees and do all these kinds of things. And her mom, Eleanor, wants her to be a princess, a different kind of princess. She wants her to know how to fix meals and do domestic stuff. And, you know, we've heard this sort of dispute before. Where Merida wants to live her own life and claim some independence. Her mom wants her not just to be domestic, but in particular to marry someone in the Highlands, to marry someone in particular that will help the family, will help the kingdom, to think about her place and her role. And doing so will bring order to the land. See, her mom sees her as a part of a bigger system that she has to be a part of, and she has a duty to fulfill. Merida wants to live her own life, and you can see this conflict. As the movie goes on to push this conflict a little farther, Merida decides to take matters into her own hands. She wants her mom to change. She wants her mom to change her mind. And in so doing, she pursues sort of an easy route. She finds a mysterious, magical woman who gives her a potion to help her mom change her mind. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and watch the clip, and you'll see this. You'll be able to see this conflict play out.
In accordance with our laws, only the firstborn may compete for the hand of the fair maiden. Archers, to your mark!
Aye, archers, to your mark!
And may the lucky arrow find its target.
Get on with it!
I bet he wishes he was tossing cabers.
Or holding up bridges. And such lovely flowing locks.
Fergus.
What?
Oh, wee lamb.
Oh, come on. Shoot, boy!
Feast your eyes.
Well, that's just grand now, isn't it?
I am Merida, and I'll be shooting for my own hand.
What are you doing?
Merida!
Curse this dress!
Merida, stop this! Don't you dare loose another arrow! Merida, I forbid it.
You're muttering.
I don't mutter.
Aye, you do. You mutter less. when something's troubling you?
I blame you. Stubbornness. It's entirely from your side of the family.
I take it the talk didn't go too well then.
I don't know what to do.
Speak to her, dear.
I do speak to her. She just doesn't listen.
Come on now. Pretend I'm Merida. Speak to me. What would you say?
I can't do this.
Sure you can. There. That's my queen. Right, here we go. I don't want to get married. I want to stay single and let my hair flow in the wind as I ride through the glen, firing arrows into the sunset.
Merida, all this work, all the time spent preparing you, schooling you, giving you everything we never had. I ask you, what do you expect us to do?
Call off the gathering. Would that kill them? You're the queen. You could just tell the lords the princess is not ready for this. In fact, she might not ever be ready for this. So that's that. Good day to you. We'll expect your declarations of war in the morning.
I understand this must all seem unfair. Even I had reservations when I faced betrothal.
Yeah.
But we can't just run away from who we are.
I don't want my life to be over. I want my freedom.
But are you willing to pay the price your freedom will cost?
I'm not doing any of this to hurt you.
If you could just try to see what I do out of love.
But it's my life. I'm just not ready.
I think you'd see if you could just...
I think I could make you understand if you would just...
Listen.
Listen. I swear, Angus, this isn't going to happen. Not by then.
So you see the problem? They each have their reasons. They each have their ways, their understanding. They each have their problems. And if only they would talk to each other, maybe a lot of the problems would be solved. But instead, Merida decides to take an easier way out. Instead of facing her mom and actually discussing this and having this sort of heart-to-heart conversation that could have saved a lot of problems, she goes and searches for a quicker way, and she finds this potion that would change her mom. And that's what it is. If I could just change you. See, that's an understanding. If the other person, if you would just change, then everything would be okay. Well, the problem is the change that occurs as Merida's mom gets turned into a bear. So the movie goes on, and the ironic part is they don't actually communicate until the mom can't speak. Sort of the irony of the movie, they don't really start to have a relationship that's sort of give and take until they're out on their own in the forest and they're trying to protect one another and they can't really talk. Then they really start to communicate. The letter that we read today of Paul's is a letter to the Philippians. He's writing it actually from a Roman jail. So he's no stranger to conflict. And he's writing it to the church in Philippi who has a dispute. And in the movie Brave, we see very clearly what this dispute is about. It's about Merida wanting some independence, about her mom wanting her to fulfill her duty, and we see the frustration of the two stubborn people that won't communicate, and we see the problems. With Paul's letter, we don't really know the details. Interestingly enough, a couple chapters later, he actually does name the two women leaders, and this is an interesting point, that Paul calls them co-workers. And this is a whole other topic, but in case you were wondering, us United Methodists have been ordaining women for a long time now. I think Paul probably did too. And he's talking to the leaders of this church that they're in conflict. And he doesn't name the conflict specifically. But instead, he appeals to something more. He doesn't get into the details, and we don't know what it might be. And Paul might even be somewhat involved. Who knows? He doesn't get into those details, but instead he appeals to something higher. To an understanding of who we are called to be. He appeals to the oneness of Christ. And he calls on them to not think, what does he say here? Complete my joy by thinking the same way, having the same love, being united and agreeing with each other. Now, that agreeing with each other, I love the Common English Bible. We read this from the Common English Bible, and often I love the Common English translation, but I think this simplifies it. This oversimplifies it. This isn't about just agreeing with each other. See, agreement is temporary. Agreement is one issue and another. You know, we can disagree. Anybody in a relationship knows that there's times when you're going to disagree. Whether you're Cubs or Cardinals fans, whether disagreeing about what you want for dinner. I mean, there's going to be disagreements. And this isn't what Paul's saying. It's not about agreement on every situation. It's something deeper than that. It's to be of one mind, he says. I want you to be of one mind. John Wesley said a long time ago that we don't necessarily have to agree to think alike, to love alike. Paul's calling them to, reminding them of who they're called to be, reminding them of who they've promised to serve, of the man that they're trying to follow. He's reminding them of Christ Jesus, and this is what truly matters. And so to hammer home the point a little bit more, I mean, he talks a few more things, these some fairly practical, general things. Each person, instead of watching out for your own good, watch out what's better for others. But then it says, adopt the mind of Christ. And to explain the mind of Christ, he quotes a song. This part of this, indented part of the reading today that our choir actually sang, it is an ancient song. It's one of the earliest recorded Christian hymns. And it's as contemporary as any music will ever sing, because it applies to today. It is both ancient, 2,000 years old, maybe a little less than 2,000 years old, and a reminder of who Christ is. Christ, who was of God, an eternal relationship with God. Another gospel writer talks about Jesus being about the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was made flesh. This idea of of Christ being eternal is found in different parts of the New Testament. But there's this understanding that Christ is eternal. Christ has a relationship with God that transcends all understanding. And yet, despite this relationship, Christ became flesh and was a man. And he was a man to know us more, to show us more, to reach with us, to connect with us in a way that no prophet, no law could ever do. And he showed us this way that was reaching out across boundaries, reaching out across racial divides, reaching out across national divides, reaching out across, hierarchy, that he ate with the Pharisees and the tax collectors. He lived this life that was full of service all the time. He emptied himself, he says. So much obedience that he was willing to go even to a cross, the most humiliating of deaths. The most painful, excruciating, shameful way to die was that cross. That Jesus was willing even to go to that. That Jesus emptied himself so much that he was willing to serve so fully. And for his trouble, for this obedience, he found resurrection. Resurrection and glory. And this is the way of Christ. This way of service, this way of reaching across, this way of unifying people, this way of gracious love. that is steadfast and endures forever. Paul reminds the people that they don't have to agree on everything, but they have one mind. And it's shown in the one they serve. This movie, Brave, was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. It was the first Pixar movie that featured a female character, had a female director. And I was reading some of the reviews of it, and there were a lot of people that reviewed it and didn't really, said it was okay, but it kind of missed the mark. And some of the reviews of it said that, you know what, it felt like the name was misleading. That they were expecting this female character to go out that could shoot bows and arrows and be brave. It was called Brave. That they expected her to go on this adventure and slay the monster and be the hero for once. They were so excited about, in this world, it was they were looking for an important female to be that courageous hero. And the movie Brave is funny because there is no beast to slay. She doesn't go on a grand adventure. Instead, she goes on builds this relationship, repairs this relationship with her mom. And in the end, the thing that heals her mom isn't a grand adventure, isn't a perfectly shot bow, it isn't a great act of strength. It's forgiveness. And it's her own acceptance of her role in what happened. See, throughout the movie she says, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault. She says it dozens of times. Her mom changes into a bear and she says, it wasn't my fault. I just wanted her to change. I didn't want this. But it's in the moment when she realizes that it was her fault. She did have a hand in this. That's when the healing takes place. And see, there's critics that say the name wasn't, that they felt misled by that name. Brave. And I feel sad for that criticism. To think that the only way in this world to be brave is to fight monsters and shoot arrows is a sad way of seeing the world. But that the truth of following Christ, the truth of this world is that there's a bravery that's deeper. The bravery, the courage it takes to forgive. The courage it takes to accept your own role in a problem. That's bravery. To do as Paul says. To not do things for selfish purposes, but with humility think of others as better than yourself. Instead of watching out for your own good, watch out for what is better for others. That is courage. That's the bravery that Christ showed. That's the bravery that Christ calls us to. To not think of your own gain, not in a self-deprecating sort of way. See, it's not about thinking yourself as low, it's about thinking of others as worthy. It's not about calling yourself unworthy, it's about recognizing that we are all Christ's children. We're all God's children. We're all created in God's image. And true courage, true bravery, is when we can lead that life that Christ loves to lead. To be ourselves, to be firm in who we are. To stand on those promises, to stand with those gifts that God has placed in you. call them and claim them and be proud of those things that God has called you to be. It's okay. Build on those strengths. Love them. Nurture them. But understand that others have gifts too. You see, the Meredith got into trouble when she took the easy way out. When she avoided the hard work of communication, she took the cowardly way of just finding a trick to change things. But she learned eventually to be brave, to stand up for who she was and appreciate who her mother was. Christ's courage was shown that he could have taken an easier way out. He could have used the power of coercion, but called upon however you want to look at it, called upon the power of God to strike people down. Maybe he could have just gotten up from that Garden of Gethsemane and walked away. But he had the courage to face the future, to face his mission, to face his calling. And then Paul says, therefore, my loved ones, carry out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It wasn't that long ago that I said, God is love. Perfect love casts out fear. And yet here we are, Paul saying, carry out your salvation with fear and trembling. And how does that work? Paul understands that this path of Christianity, this path of discipleship is not an easy one. And the true courage, the brave ones are the ones that it's not that you never feel fear. It's that you persevere in the face of it. That fear and trembling isn't about fearing God and punishment. It's about taking seriously these words. It's about taking seriously this teaching, this call that can be hard sometimes. Forgiveness, accountability, these are scary things. Looking out for others, caring for one another, can be a scary thing sometimes. But the truly brave one is the one that moves forward anyway. It's the one that calls upon the power of Christ. The power of God to fill us with strength. And walk this way of salvation, this way of restored relationship, this way of renewed hope. Even in the midst of the monsters. Merida was brave. She was brave when she realized she could love. Christ was certainly brave. He was brave when he stood up for what he believed and stood up on the power of God. And we here are called to be brave. Brave in the midst of trial, brave in the midst of temptation, brave in the midst of hurt and anger. But to follow Christ anyway. To go with God, to go together on this path of salvation.